So I started thinking a lot about what philosophers call the problem of evil when I was a freshman in college. As Kendall mentioned, I went to the University of Virginia. I grew up in a non-religious family, like not an atheist family. Like we didn't talk about Richard Dawkins at dinner or anything like that. We just were not religious. It just was not a big part of our life. When I went to college, two big changes happened for me by the middle of my sophomore year. First, I had gone to UVA dead set on being a lawyer. Like I was 100% pre-law since I was 14 years old. Since I was at that stupid debate tournament at Emory, I thought I was destined to be a lawyer. And I took a philosophy class called Issues of Life and Death my freshman year at UVA, and I loved it. I mean, I just loved that class so much more than every other politics and economics class that I was taking. And I really caught the bug, and by the beginning of my sophomore year, realized I was pretty serious about wanting to be a philosopher when I grew up rather than a lawyer. And I just got much more interested in bigger existential questions that I had frankly never really thought about when I was in high school. So that was one big shift. But another big shift that happened was I converted to Catholicism. And that is a much longer story. That could be like a whole forum in and of itself. But long story short, my first year of college, the September 11th attacks happened. I was from North Carolina. I did not know anybody who lived in New York or Washington, D.C. It felt like a very distant event that I kind of was watching unfold in my life that year. But I was also starting to ask a lot of philosophical questions. I was asking a lot of personal questions too, questions about like, what will it mean for me to have a good life? What kind of person do I want to be now that I'm away from my family and my parents and making a lot of decisions for myself for the first time? And I found myself really spiritually searching that first year of college. On the first anniversary of the September 11th attacks, that was the first time I went to church. There was a Catholic church that was right near the dorm that I lived in. I was an RA in first year dorm, so it was kind of near where I had been living all throughout college. And on the anniversary of the attacks, I'd read a news story in one of my classes about children who had lost their parents in the World Trade Center when it collapsed. And it was meant to be, it was on like page 3 of the New York Times. It's meant to be just a story kind of marking the tragedy of that event. And I didn't know any of these people, but reading the story, it really touched me. Like it hit me really hard in a way that I had not felt about total strangers yet at that point in my life. And I remember thinking very seriously, like what a terrible world this is, where people who do everything right, lawyers, great lawyers who got into Yale Law School, just like hit every possible accomplishment that I could have imagined at age 18, show up to work one day and some terrorists fly an airplane into the building and they're gone and their children suffer immensely because of that. And I remember thinking like, I reject this world. Like I reject the fact that this is a world that has this logic in it. And I remember trying to talk to my mom about it. I called my mom at work, and I never talked to her in the middle of the week at that point, but I called her, it was a Wednesday, and was like, I just want you to know how much I love our family and how much I love life, but how terrible I think this world can be sometimes. And she thought I was high as a kite and wondered why I was bothering her. She's a receptionist in a dental office. She has patients lining up, and she's like, I don't have time to have this big, deep conversation with you right now. Talk to your dad when he gets home. And I hung up the phone with her and I thought, I just want to be around people who try to deal with this, think through these questions today. I feel this draw to be with other people. And I don't want to go to a protest about Al-Qaeda or anything like that. I want to be with people who are just thinking about what a world it is that we live in. And so I thought, light bulb goes off. This is totally what religious people do. Especially when sad things happen, religious people come together and they talk about it and they say prayers and they just try to make sense of what's going on. So I'd been eyeballing that church for a while and I decided I'm going to go check it out. I'm sure they're going to do a huge service because it's the first anniversary of the biggest event in recent history. So I looked up the times on my computer and sure enough they had a 5 o'clock mass, an afternoon mass. And so I put on the nicest clothes that I had in my dorm at the time and walked over. And of course, I don't know how many folks here are Roman Catholic, but if you know anything about Catholicism, You know that a weekday mass, it's like 30 minutes long. It's where they dump all the readings that they don't want to do on Sundays. And I show up, and it's me, and it's like 4 old ladies and a priest, and the homily has nothing to do with the 9/11 attacks. And I really did not have an understanding about what was going on. Like, they did communion, they did the Eucharist, knew enough not to eat anything, but really did not have the kind of deep understanding of what was going on. But nevertheless, I felt like a profound sense of belonging and peace being there. And I remember looking at the women who were praying, who go to Mass like every day, and thinking, these guys are tuned into a kind of understanding that I really want for my life, like I've been seeking for my life, and I don't understand it, I can't explain it, but it's like something that's answering very personally a deep need that I'm feeling within myself. So I started going back because I was kind of irrational at this point. I started going back on Wednesdays because I felt like Wednesday was when I had that experience. I want to keep having that experience, so I just tried to recreate the conditions. And on Wednesday afternoons, I would show up to that same service. And you show up as a lone 19-year-old for 3 straight weeks in a row to daily Mass, and eventually a priest notices and kind of catches you on the way out. And then there was a great Dominican priest who kind of intervened and said, if you like Wednesdays, you love Sundays. If you think this is interesting, you got to come back on the weekend. And so I started attending Sunday Mass, and I was not asking deep philosophical questions. I know some people that convert to religious faith. I know a lot of philosophers that become religious, who will tell these stories about how they sat down and they read all of the Summa, or they read all of the church's confessional documents and then decided they were probably true and assigned statistical weight to each of the claims and did this big analysis, and that's what brought them into the faith. That was not what happened for me. It was very much this kind of feeling of this personal draw, I belong here, I belong with God, this is what I'm meant to be doing. And I did this program called RCIA my 3rd year, which is basically a kind of course that you take to try to become Catholic, and was received into the church in my junior year. I bring all this up because, one, the problem of suffering, thinking about suffering for me was a proximate cause of how I came to discover my faith. For some people, suffering is a humongous obstacle for their religious faith. But for me, at least temporally, it started off as being one of the biggest things that moved me to faith. But as I progressed as a philosopher, I realized in the second half of college that it's very, very hard to treat your faith rationally and not wrestle mightily with the problem of trying to understand how a morally perfect, omnipotent, omniscient God would allow things like the September 11th attacks or all of the various forms of personal suffering that we undergo in our lives. And we'll have a chance to talk about that rational journey, I think, quite a bit tonight. But I will say, for me, for most of the rest of college and for the first 4 years or so of grad school, I went to grad school for philosophy right after undergrad, I pretty much tried to keep my religious life and my philosophical life as far apart from each other as possible. I was very worried that philosophy is an extremely secular discipline, and where I went to grad school is very secular. I was very worried if my philosophy peers or professors found out that I was a person of faith and that I'd converted, as an adult, then I would be embarrassed. I would not be able to answer their questions. I'd look like a moron. I was also very worried that if the people I knew from church and the people in my religious community found out I was a philosopher, they'd expect me to know Christian philosophy, they'd expect me to have deep views about how to interpret Aquinas and Augustine. And I did logic. I started off doing this very, very contemporary, very theoretical form of philosophy that had nothing to do with medieval stuff. And so I didn't have any really intelligent philosophical things to say to my faith community, and just thought the best way to live my life is to just keep these kind of compartmentalized. And as I finished up graduate school and started to think about what kind of philosopher I wanted to be as a professor, as a professional, I realized that you couldn't keep those aspects of my life separate anymore. And that's when I started really thinking hard about the problem of evil and what I think is the right strategy for answering it.